Good morning to you. For Telesur, I'm Regan Devines in Caracas, Venezuela. Thank you so much for joining us on our morning news program from the south. Our top story takes us to Venezuela. Now, new evidence has been revealed which may expose U.S. and Colombian involvement in ongoing plans to overthrow the democratically elected president, Nicolas Maduro. The head of the country's National Assembly, Diosdado Cabello, announced new information had been uncovered in the high-profile murder of Liana Ergueta. In video footage made public by Cabello, the prime suspect in Ergueta's murder, Jose Perez Benta, appeared to confess to the killing after receiving financial support from the U.S. Embassy. Cabello accused former Colombian President Alvaro Uribe of being involved in efforts to destabilize Venezuela.
Uribe is responsible for the deaths reported in Venezuela. He has financed and promoted paramilitarism here in Venezuela. He, directly.
Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro has announced the closure of the country's border with Colombia for a period of 72 hours. The measures follow an incident that left 3 soldiers wounded after coming under fire while carrying out an anti-smuggling operation in the border state of Táchira. Now, Venezuelan official sources say the soldiers were ambushed by paramilitary forces. Maduro condemned the violence and called for nationwide solidarity with the injured soldiers. To Mexico, where President Enrique Peña Nieto has publicly condemned the killing of photojournalist Ruben Espinosa. Some consider his reaction to the murders to be long overdue, as the killing took place almost 3 weeks ago. Espinosa and 4 women were found dead in a Mexico City apartment in the case that has sparked a nationwide outcry. Critics have accused the government of not doing enough to prosecute killers of journalists and human rights defenders. They also expressed anger at the fact that authorities were calling the crime a robbery. Espinosa and activist Nadia Vera had fled Veracruz, denouncing death threats from Governor Javier Duarte.
With a very relevant case of multiple homicides, without a doubt prosecutors are committed to strengthening their efforts and to give opportune and proper attention to the investigation and arrest of those responsible for the aggression, attacks, murder against journalists and human rights defenders.
And in Mexico's southern state of Oaxaca, authorities say they are deploying drones to protect turtle eggs, which are putting the species at risk of extinction. To protect poaching, that is. Remote-controlled aerial drones will be used to patrol beaches where turtles lay their eggs. Environmentalists estimate as many as 80% of turtle eggs are poached and sold on the black market. Authorities say the drones are part of broader efforts to crack down on Mexico's illegal turtle egg trade.
This will be a campaign by intelligence work by Marines in the ocean and land to detect what I said previously. Not just the extraction, but the commercialization, distribution, sell in markets where they're sold.
Meanwhile, fighting in Colombia's civil war is now at its lowest level in 3 decades. Fabrizio Hochschild, the UN's humanitarian coordinator for Colombia, has said a massive reduction in violence is largely due to the FARC's unilateral ceasefire. The leftist rebels and the government have been negotiating since late 2012 to end the more than 5-decade-old civil war that has left over 220,000 people dead. FARC has repeatedly but unsuccessfully asked the government to agree to a bilateral ceasefire. Recently, though, the government did agree to de-escalate the military operations against FARC targets.
Eso es muy alarmante, porque en la misma fecha.
We can say that yes, truces have an impact at a humanitarian level. As various analysts have said, during the unilateral ceasefires, particularly the one from December 2014 to May 22, 2015, there were the lowest recorded levels of violence in the past few years. There have even been some who say in the past 30 years.
Also in Colombia, where according to the United Nations, 69 human rights activists, community leaders and politicians have been killed this year alone. This despite efforts to stop decades of violence racking the country. UN expert for Colombia, Fabrizio Hochschild, said the death toll was very alarming. He added that the deaths of these activists has doubled in comparison with 2014. The UN official also warned that leftist leaders are particularly threatened, especially now that Colombia is building up to regional elections in October.
This is very alarming because last year we figured that was 35. That means this year it may double, which is a very big and regrettable setback in the protection of social and community leaders.
Our correspondent in Honduras, Gerardo Torres, tells us that over half of the youth in the country have no job opportunities and live in extreme poverty. But young lawmakers are trying to change that. Here is that report.
The majority of Honduras' 8 million people are under 30, and of that close to 5 million youth, 2 million are unemployed and living in extreme poverty.
At first, you live with what your parents give you or the help of the family. Sometimes it is impossible to eat 3 meals a day. Sometimes you can only have 2 or 1. These are experiences that the majority have lived in this country, and the problem is that we don't see on the horizon any possible solution. Instead, everything looks worse.
28-year-old lawmaker Alejandra Mancilla is part of a project that will try to get all the young lawmakers together and try to create laws that will create more opportunities for the young population.
There are different problems, but one of the biggest is unemployment in the young population. Even though we are more than 50% of the population, but 25% have no job, have to abandon their studies, there's a lack of opportunities, and we also have increased rates in teen pregnancies.
Currently in Honduras, 40% of homes are headed by a young person, and the number is growing as the amount of work decreases. The youth poverty problem will be difficult to combat if there aren't concrete actions from the government to allow young citizens to have a real opportunity without having to migrate or join criminal activities. Gerardo Torres, Telesur, Central America.
A huge explosion rocked the Egyptian capital Cairo and left at least 29 people injured. Unidentified assailants placed a car bomb near a state security building and a courthouse. Security sources inspected the site of the blast where there was a burned-out vehicle and a crater filled with water. Nobody has yet claimed responsibility for the attack, but the Islamic State group have previously carried out attacks on security forces in the country, killing hundreds in the past 24 months.
We were waiting at the traffic lights, cars around us from all directions, and we were surprised just as the lights changed we began to move, and the explosion happened from that direction. All I saw were the flames and the noise and the things flying off the cars.
As the Saudi-led coalition continues to carry out indiscriminate airstrikes in Yemen, the humanitarian crisis intensifies. The UN said more than 4,300 people have died in the conflict, while hunger, disease, and suffering quickly spread in the impoverished country. A UN expert said he was shocked to see the humanitarian impact of the civil war that erupted in Yemen late March. He said at least 1,000 children have been killed.
I was shocked by what I saw. The civilian population is bearing the brunt of the conflict. A shocking 4 out of 5 Yemenis require humanitarian assistance, and nearly 1.5 million people are internally displaced. More than 1,000 children have been killed or injured, and the number of young people recruited or used as fighters is increasing.
Protests were reignited in St. Louis near Ferguson after police killed yet another black teen. The chief of police, Sam Dodson, claims officers were serving a search warrant at a house from which 2 armed black youths fled. He said one of them pointed his gun at the officers who then shot him 4 times. The 18-year-old died on the spot. The officers were immediately put on administrative leave. Shortly after, hundreds took to the streets to protest racial police brutality. Witnesses said demonstrators are fed up with police killing minorities across the country.
Officers in the rear alley ordered them to stop and to drop the gun. As they ran, one of the individuals turned and pointed the gun at the officers. There were 2 officers in the alley. Both officers fired.
In Washington state, a fire raged on, threatening the homes of over 4,000 families. 3 firefighters died in the fire and 4 others were injured. Local officials said there were more than a dozen major blazes burning across various U.S. western states. They added that more than 1 million acres have been blackened so far. The wildfire in Washington has put at risk the towns of Twips and Winthrop.
Of course, thanks to our news team in Quito, Ecuador for the World News Update. Now, when you think of duathlons or triathlons, you think of high-paced, action-packed human races that put endurance and sheer willpower to the test, right? Well, what you're about to see is a bit different. In an attempt to attract tourists back to Kenya, the numbers of which have been dwindling because of the trial disputes happening there, a form of trial reconciliation is taking place. Camels and their riders have been competing in activities and festivities aimed at cross-cultural understanding and peacemaking in the region. Here, tribal members also partake in games and cultural events which hopefully reduce some of the region's tensions.
Those 5 days we are coming, it was like a training for us because we are walking, and every time it's like evening when camels settle in the seasonal river in the wild with the wild animals, leopards and the rest, we train ourselves like a little running, a little jogging while the camels are resting.
For more on these and other stories, please visit our website, telesurtv.net/English. For Telesur English, I'm Regan Devines. We'll have another brief for you at midday.